Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the C++ guy, with another really great video. I think this time we're going to get into it. What makes up a C++ program? What are all the components? How do you set it up? We're going to be doing that many times. It's going to become second nature to you. So let's get started. Okay, we're going to do this on Windows, and I'm going to do it on Eclipse. Again, you've got other tools, Visual Studio Code. We're going to stick with Eclipse just because it's so useful, it's so compatible across operating systems, and it's just most professionals' choices for an integrated development environment. So let's get that started. Now you can follow along if you're using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, even Xcode. You can go ahead and follow along with those because it's pretty much the same thing. C++ is a global language that is pretty much the same on all platforms. Windows is a bit different. Mac is a tiny bit different, Apple Mac. But we're just going to go ahead and use Eclipse. So let's go ahead and let that load up. We're going to launch. It looks like I updated Eclipse here, so it's going to update the Eclipse workspace that I signed up for, or I set up. Okay, so over here, by the way, if you don't see this screen, and this happens quite often with new installs, if you don't see this screen, let me go ahead and try to get us to the place where you might see it. I also love how Eclipse now is getting in the habit of asking for donations. Even if you donate, it still asks. So if you're getting this screen, how do I get to the actual project development screen? How do I get to the that development screen? Well, just go ahead and click on the workbench. That's what it's called. It's called a workbench. All right, so let's go ahead and let's create a new project. I'm going to say File, New, and it comes up and says C++ project. If it doesn't say that, go down to Project, expand C and C++, click on C++ project, next. Again, give it a name. My first CPP. I'm going to click on Hello World. Now this is exactly the same thing we did in the installation video, where we created your first project. You can put in your name, your copyright information. I'm going to turn off release because I just want to be able to debug the code, and I'm not going to be giving it to anybody. I'm not going to be selling it, so I don't really have to do the release, and I'm going to click Finish. Now what Eclipse will do for you, it's going to generate an example code. I'm going to close all these little tabs over here. It's going to create its example code. Over here on the left is our project where we can expand it. You can see this thing called includes. This is an area you shouldn't mess around with, so I'm going to leave it collapsed. And then we've got our SRC folder, which stands for source, and that's where our source code is. And our source code, as you can see right here, and I'm going to just go ahead. The first thing I always do is I just always build it to make sure my compiler's working, make sure, and it looks like I screwed something up. What did I do wrong? So let's go ahead. I'm going to right click on that project. I'm going to say delete. I'm going to say delete it from the hard drive. Let's do that again. Let's make sure we do it again correctly. I'm going to say C++ project. So this one I did a little bit different. I said C++ project. I'm going to click on C++ managed build next. Give it a name. Oh, I know what I did wrong. I'm going to click on Hello World. I forgot to click on MinGW GCC. And that is the actual compiler. That's the thing that we installed with MSys2. So I forgot to click on that. Click next, next, turn off release, finish. And that's why I love to build right after I create a project, is to make sure I didn't do it incorrectly. Okay, we click the little hammer. It's going to build the program. Everything looks good. You can even run it just to make sure. Everything looks good. I'm very happy. Okay. So what are these components? Now this is a little bit difficult to see because of the colors that Eclipse uses. So I'm going to highlight with my mouse. The first thing we see up here are a whole bunch of lines with double slashes in the front. Those are comments. Those specify the version of the source code, the author's name, the date it was created, any copyright stuff. Remember that window when we were creating our project where it asked for name and copyright? It's going to put all that in there. But as we create new versions of the code, we're going to want to add another comment line. It's kind of like a history of the code. So there's different things about a C++ program. There's about 6 different things that make up the program. There's keywords. We're going to talk about each one of these. There's keywords, there's punctuation, there's operators, there's literal data, immediate data like numbers and strings, there's comments, and then putting all those things together into a format that the compiler can understand is called syntax. There's another thing called logic, which is really up to you. It's the logic of your program. I mean, I can write all kinds of syntactically correct code, but it may be ridiculous and not do anything. I mean, I can say all kinds of sentences with the right spelling and the right grammar, but it's completely unintelligible. And that's pretty much an analogy to writing correctly syntaxed code, but it not being logically correct. It really doesn't mean anything. So let's get on to the different things. I've already talked about comments, and that's an example of some comments. We'll talk more about it. But let's take a look at these other components. So let's look at the pound include, the hashtag include. What does the hashtag include mean? The hashtag is what they call a pre-processing directive. It says before the compiler actually executes, before it begins to take your program code and convert it into machine code, it's going to, in this case, it's going to include additional code. It's going to copy that code into your program, in this case, IOStream. Now the hashtag, the pound sign, is punctuation. Include is a keyword. The less than sign is punctuation that says include the IOStream, include files and libraries into my project so I can use IOStream. And what is IOStream? IOStream is a set of features, a set of functionality that allows me to do things like printing to the screen, getting user input, formatting data that I'm going to put on the screen. That's what IOStream is, and that's what that line of code is. The next line of code, using namespace std semicolon, there's a bunch of stuff there, but each one of these words is a keyword using a namespace. It says that I want to use the namespace called std, which is the standard namespace. I want to indicate in my program that I want to use that as my one of my primary namespaces. I won't have to type as much. It does have some limitations. We'll talk more about that later in this course. Now, there's a lot of people that would argue you don't want to do that, and by people I mean developers. You don't want to do that. But starting off, it's going to make things a lot easier. And as we actually get into some of the code, I will take that out and demonstrate what happens if you do not use using namespace std in your code. Now, you can have blank lines in your code. It's not a good idea to have lots of blank lines, but you can use blank lines in your code to kind of separate things out a little bit. The next line of code, this int main open and close parenthesis, that is what we call a function. Now, how do we know that it's a function? Because it has a name followed by open and close parenthesis. Now, if you're on a Mac using Xcode, you might see something like this. And what's inside of the parentheses are data types with names that's going to be sent to the main function in this case. So we're going to talk more about that when we get into functions. But what we've got here is we've got main as the name of the function. Now, main is also the entry point function name that the operating system is looking for to say, where do I start running your program? Where do I start executing statements? And that's what main is. It's the entry point to your program. Int is the data that's going to be sent back to the operating system when main is done executing, to tell the operating system who called the program, who loaded the program and executed it. It's going to say, hey, what is the status of this program? We're going to see what that is in just a moment. Then you've got this open curly brace. That is punctuation, and that means that everything between the open curly brace and the closing curly brace, Those are the statements of the main function. So we're going to talk more about that as the course goes on. This line of code right here is really our very first line of C++ code. And if you notice at the end, there's the / prints hello world. That's another comment. Comments are ignored by the compiler, but they're put there to make absolutely sure that you document what you were doing, why you were doing it, maybe who did it, for future programmers, or even yourself. If you open up a program you haven't touched for years, you'll be able to look and see exactly what it was that you were doing. So comments are invaluable. And we've got some punctuation. We've got operators. So this is our first example of an operator. The streaming operator, less than, means send everything to the right over to the thing to the left. So in this case, it's going to send the string hello world. And why is that a string? Because it's enclosed in double quotes. Send the string hello world, send it, stream it to the cout operator or the cout keyword. And the cout keyword is actually the console output. It's going to send something to the screen, which you saw that happen right down here when we ran our program. So the console is, you can see it, the console tab right here. It was sent, hello world was sent to the console, and so that's why we can see it. We have another streaming operator that's going to send endl. Now endl is either a variable or a constant that's sending the carriage return line feed, which means go to the next line, then go to the beginning of the next line. So endl is used if you want to go to the next line of your output. Also notice the semicolon at the end. The semicolon says that that statement is now done. Unless there's an open brace like on int main, you can see that there's no semicolon at the end of that statement because there's an open brace. But because there's no open brace here and that's the end of our statement, we put a semicolon. What's this next line? The return 0, that's another line of C++ code. Return says return to whoever called me, whoever executed me as a program. Return to that the value 0. Remember the int to the left side of the main? That's what we're returning. We're returning an integer. An integer is a number that has no decimal point. It has no fractional component. It is a whole number. So I'm returning the number 0. Notice the semicolon at the end. That means that that's the end of that particular statement or line. Then we've got our close brace, and the close brace says that that is the end of the main function. That is the end of the main code inside of that function. And I always like to put a comment at the very end of my functions because sometimes the functions can get pretty long. Now I'm going to put a bunch of blank lines in there. Well, I may not know what this close brace belongs to. So I always like to add comments at the end of all of my code close braces to remind me, because I don't want to have to scroll up every time, but to remind me who that close brace belongs to. So that's actually a really good habit to get into. And some companies actually require it. So I'm going to get rid of that. Now, every time you make a change to your program code, you need to save it, and then you need to build it. I always click on the Save All button, or I could also say File, Save if it was enabled. The reason it's not enabled on Eclipse is because I haven't made any changes. If I put a single space there, and I say File, you can see I see Save All or Save. Now, the reason why I always pick Save All is that as this course moves on, I'm going to show you how to add additional files to your project, and if you say Save All, it's going to save them all. Okay, then after you save them, you then build them. You can see your build down here. You can see the compile is the first statement, and then you can see the link is the second statement. If I click anywhere outside of here, and if I try to build it, I'm going to get I could possibly get an error. So if you ever get a funny error that it doesn't know what to do, click inside of your code someplace and build it. Now, if the code has already been built and it's up to date, and I click build again, it may say nothing to do. In this case, it keeps building it. That's fine. Don't have a problem. Actually, I'm not building it. I'm running it. Over here is the build. There we go. It says nothing to build because I didn't make any changes. If I put a space there and I say build, it's going to say nothing to build because I didn't save it. So you have to save your code before you build it, and you have to build it before you run it. And the build is made up of the compile and the link steps. Okay, so that is the end of this video on how or what a C++ program looks like. I hope to see you at our next video.